And it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. And we're going to take another deep dive today because so many of you like our deep dives. Heather?
I'm into them, but I'm biased.
Well, I am too. And we're going to go into a deep dive in terms of dynastic wealth and democracy.
Yes.
As we're going to see, I mean, this is a big, big deal. Heather, I mean, the data, you've been watching.
So, yes, I mean, we track a lot of data, but the 50 billionaire families, 50 of them, have already donated $600 million to the 2024 presidential election.
50 billionaire families, already 600 million. Now, so just to put this in context, we know that in the 2016 election, the 40% of the total donations came from just a handful, a relatively handful of families. And that handful keeps on getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the amount that they're providing keeps on getting larger and larger. So most of this money, where did it go?
That's it. Over 2/3, 69%, went to Trump-affiliated conservative organizations and conservative campaigns.
And Republicans
PACs.
Generally. So this is not money that's just going out into politics. This is money targeted to Republicans. And why do we suppose all of this money is going to Trump Republicans?
Perhaps, I don't know, they're a fan of some tax cuts?
Well,
That could be something.
The reality, just so we're all together on this, is that the Trump tax cut, the big tax cut that was passed, the only legislative achievement of the Trump administration was that December 2017 tax cut that went into effect in January 2018. There was a huge tax benefit for corporations and in big, rich individuals. And we saw that tax cut actually not only helped them, nothing trickled down.
Nope.
Despite what Trump predicted.
It was particularly bad for people of color.
And particularly bad, but also it expanded the debt and the national deficit. And that meant that more taxpayer money went into paying the interest on the debt. And the biggest holders of the debt are, guess what?
Dun, 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 dun.
Rich people
Yep.
in America, not foreigners.
And I think they also support Trump and other conservative PACs, et cetera, and people because of the regulatory relief. Second item.
And you remember Trump, not that long ago, this was reported by the Washington Post, had a meeting with big oil and said, if you support me and give me $1 billion for this campaign, I will get rid of a lot of the environmental regulations that are holding back your profits.
Yep. Bingo. Quid pro quo.
So this is
Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, this is. I mean, this is corruption 101.
Right.
It's bribery. It should be outlawed. I think it probably is against the law. But this is what's happening to America. And so when a lot of people say, why should I worry about democracy, or why should I uphold democracy when you've got democracy is taken over by this kind of money, you can understand their cynicism.
Of course, but think about it this way too. So those 50 billionaire families gave over $600 million for, in 2024, but that's only 0.6% of their total wealth. They are so incredibly wealthy. There is so much money at the top.
And they got a good return on that investment in terms of the Trump tax cut.
Yep.
And they're expanding. Trump is promising. This is what he did with the oil companies, what he's done with everybody who's the big funders. He's promising them to extend the 2017, 2018 tax cut beyond 2025.
Yeah.
And that would mean even bigger debt, bigger deficits. And how do you pay for that? Everybody else has to pay.
Comes out from everybody else's
and it comes out of probably the biggest items in the federal deficit, the federal budget, which are Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid.
Very popular programs. though.
The most popular programs. People pay into these programs. They think that they're paying into it, and they're going to discover that the programs are not there. So this is a huge kind of swindle at the basis of this entire campaign.
Do you know how many billionaires America has now?
I don't know. Let me guess.
Hot off the press.
Okay, let me guess. 728.
Ooh, 813.
Well-
830. You were very close. It's like you've been doing this for a while. And they control 5.7 trillion in wealth. 5.7 trillion compared to the bottom 50% of Americans, which is 65 million households, control 3.7 trillion.
Now, when you say control, I assume you mean own. I mean,
Right,
that is
have it in their coffers.
So the bottom half of America has 2.5% of all the wealth of America.
Yep,
And the top 1% has something like
30%.
30% of all the wealth
The
of
top
America.
1%.
And this is getting more and more distorted. I think the important thing is if we had a graph up here, I used to teach this stuff. And I remember students would gasp when they saw what was happening. And it's even worse now.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse and worse.
It's grim. Okay. So what is happening? I mean, so what's contributing to this? And let's talk about this burst of money at the top.
Well, a big contributor is basically the fact that companies now are buying back their shares of stock. They're using 50, 70% of all of their profits to buy back their shares of stock, and that artificially boosts stock prices. It boosts CEO pay. CEO pay is now 350 times the typical worker's pay. When I was starting to write about this and research all of this in the 1960s and 70s, CEO pay was 60 times. 60 times.
Right.
When Bill Clinton was running for president, CEO pay was about 120 times the pay of the typical worker. Now it's 500 times the pay of the typical worker.
And that's average. Some are even higher than that, no?
Yes.
Some of the low wage.
In fact, averages, be careful of averages. Do you remember the
different than
basketball
medians.
player Shaquille O'Neal?
Of course.
Well,
Used to see
Shaq
them
O'Neal
play.
and I had an average height of 6'1".
Oh, interesting to think about.
Well, don't think about it too much.
No.
But I use that to say I use
No.
that with my students.
It
Suggest
is
that averages are always deceiving because people at the top are pulling up the average.
People at the top,
At
like
the
Shaquille
top.
O'Neal.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so, it's so brutal. So this CEO pay. So what can we actually do about that? So
this is-
restructure capitalism.
Well,
but
this is
what
where
else?
tax policy comes in. You have to get rid of big money in politics because that's what's ratcheting all of this up. They're getting tax breaks, they're getting regulatory relief, they're getting changes in laws that make them even richer. So yes, getting big money out of politics, but also getting taxes where they should be. So the
Yep.
wealthy are paying a fair share of their wealth and income in taxes. And this is part of the upcoming election that is not really being talked about very much. But Joe Biden has proposed putting a big tax on stock buybacks, increasing taxes on people at the very top,
Yep.
people who are earning over $400,000 a year. That is, the incremental tax over $400,000 would be higher, and a wealth tax. And this is something that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were talking about years ago.
Yeah. And also, there's been some novel policy happenings at different levels, cities, states, counties. San Francisco is now taxing companies who pay their CEOs above a certain amount. So there's lots of different levers, right?
I'm going to go into it. Can I share with you a little history?
Ooh, please.
Because in 1992, Bill Clinton, when he was running, said that no company should be able to deduct from company corporate income any CEO pay over $1 million.
Wow. Chump change today.
Well, chump change today, but what happened to his idea? Scene two. We're in the White House. I'm there with Lloyd Benson, a lovely man who was Secretary of the Treasury at that time, and Bob Rubin, who was the head of the National Economic Council. And the three of us are sitting around at Bill Clinton's direction saying, I want to implement this idea because I promised the public. And Lloyd Benson and Bob Rubin said, well, we ought to allow companies to provide more than $1 million of compensation if the compensation is tied to stock performance.
Hello.
I said, no, don't do that. That's not what Bill Clinton had in mind. And they said, well, that's logical. I mean, if it's tied to stock performance, what's the problem? And I said, there's a big problem in terms of just fairness and the appearance of fairness. They argued with me. Bob, are you still out there? You are still, I mean, Lloyd Benson passed. But Bob, you were there. You remember this meeting, right? Right, Bob? So anyway, long story short, that's their provision. Tie executive pay to stock performance, and you can get any amount of executive pay deducted from corporate income. Oof. That went into effect. And Heather, from that point on, CEO pay just soared because it was stock options.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of it is today.
And also, you told me once recently that people exercise their stock options at opportune times.
And it's not just people. It is CEOs and top executives. They exercise their stock options when the company buys back the stock and artificially raises the price of the stock. If this is not manipulation,
that's what I was going to say.
This is stock manipulation. This is what the 1933 and 1934 Securities Acts were designed to avoid. Ronald Reagan's SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, allowed stock buybacks and said it wasn't stock manipulation. Well, this is stock manipulation. Of course it is.
I know. And the other thing we should mention, too, is that the wealthy dictate policy in many instances. What was that study you cited?
Yeah, there was a study actually by two professors, Gillens and Page. It was done a number of years ago, and they looked at 1,200 policy decisions in Congress between, I think it was 1997 and the early 2000s. It was before Citizens United, before the Supreme Court opened the floodgates of money in politics, big money in politics. But Gillens and Page looked at these in detail to try to decide who had the most influence over these 1,200 policies. And their conclusion was not the average American, not labor, not environmental or any other sort of public interest group. It was big corporations and CEOs. Now, this is, again, before Citizens United.
Right. Have you seen our colleague who loves for us to watch various musicals, and he flagged the musical 1776 for us, which came out in the 70s. I don't know. I think this particular scene is from the 70s. And property is discussed and policy is discussed, and it's scarily prescient and also just ridiculous.
Well, let's watch.
Mr. Hancock, you're a man of property, one of us. Why don't you join us in our minuet? Why do you persist in dancing with John Adams? Good Lord, sir, you don't even like him.
That is true. He annoys me quite a lot. But still, I'd rather trot to Mr. Adams' new gabot.
Why? For personal glory? For a place in history? Be careful, sir. History will brand him and his followers as traitors.
Traitors, Mr. Dickinson? To what? The British Crown or the British half-crown? Fortunately, there are not enough men of property in America to dictate policy.
Perhaps not. But don't forget that most men with nothing would rather protect the possibility of becoming rich than face the reality of being poor. And that is why they will follow us
to the right, ever to the right, never to the left, forever to the right. Where there's gold, a market that will hold, tradition that is old, reluctant to be bold.
To the right, forever to the right, never to the left, forever to the right.
Yes, you missed your calling.
That particular clip didn't make it into the final movie. Richard Nixon saw this, and he persuaded Jack Warner, the producer, to cut that scene.
Wow.
So this is not just the FBI trying to tell Frank Capra
exactly, that's what I was thinking.
This is Richard Nixon
right.
trying to prevent the public from revolting against.
Right. And you're referencing
to the
It's a
right,
Wonderful Life.
To the Nixon right.
Oh my gosh. So
before Ronald Reagan right.
I know. Well, so the point is, this has been going on for a while now.
But it's getting worse.
Right.
And it really, I've chronicled this. I've seen it. When I was in the Clinton administration, even Bill Clinton would sell essentially the Clinton the Lincoln bedroom. Some pundit, and I can't remember who said the Lincoln bedroom is the only bedroom where the guests leave money under the pillow.
Oh, it's depressing.
Yeah.
It's depressing. So let's talk about this giant influx of wealth that is about to happen, this intergenerational transfer.
Well, the background is that the boomers, the wealthiest boomers, not all boomers by any stretch of the imagination, but the wealthiest boomers are exceedingly wealthy. And as they pass, and they are passing, goodbye, I'm a boomer too, by the way. I'm not an exceedingly wealthy boomer, but I will pass. But the wealthy boomers are passing, and they will leave their fortunes to their children, mostly millennials. And that has been estimated to be anywhere from a $40 to a $60 trillion, the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in history. Even now, Heather, 60% of all the wealth in America is owned by people who did not earn the wealth.
Right.
They are the heirs of people who earned the wealth. So you can't, even the conservatives who say, well, people, if they don't have all of this wealth, they're not going to have an incentive to do innovation. And, well, that may be true, but you don't need to have billions of dollars, and you don't need to send it off to your children.
The order of magnitude.
The order of magnitude is extraordinary.
It's hard to even think about it. Did I tell you I was in a cab in New York, and they have the ads on the back of the seats, and it was this real estate firm, and it was like, hi, are you about to get super rich with a landslide you can't believe and this large generational transfer of wealth that's coming your way? We're here to help you spend it on property savvily. I'm not kidding.
Oh,
this is a new industry.
Well, it's a huge industry. It's the wealth management industry, but it's not just wealth management, it's super wealth management. People don't know what to do with it. They're putting it into property that is indirectly raising property values. Try to buy anything in Manhattan or any place where there are high property values, you can't do it. And once this intergenerational transfer occurs, it's going to be even crazier and even worse. We have not seen anything like this in this country. The ultimate question boils down to whether democracy is compatible with this kind of concentration of wealth and income. And Louis Brandeis, the great jurist and Supreme Court justice, at the end of the first Gilded Age, he said, and I'm trying to quote him, I'm just going to be able to paraphrase him, America has a choice. We can either have great wealth in the hands of a few, or we can have our democracy. But we can't have both. And that is even more, now that we're in a second Gilded Age, that is even more the choice today.
Ooh, it's so scary. And you've talked about this, but wealth begets wealth. Now, that's for multiple reasons. One, it's, they're contributing to who's getting into office, so they control some power there. But also, it's just the nature of money, the way the stock market works, the way these, wealth, the banks work.
Well, a good example, the stock market is now at almost historic highs. Is that good for the country? Is it good for the economy? Well, the stock market is not the economy. But what people very often don't take account of is that the richest 1% of Americans, they own over half the value of all shares of stock owned by Americans.
Right.
And the richest 10% own over 90% of the value of all the shares of stock owned by Americans. So the stock market is really a means by which more and more of the wealth is kind of taken away from, essentially, the average working person.
Right. What's interesting, too, is that, of course, Joe Biden is not even discussed in terms of the stock market. But I remember, all these polls that are saying, wasn't it wonderful when Trump was here? People have this amnesia. You've talked about it. And he was saying the stock market is the economy and aren't I fabulous and it's so great. But we're not seeing that today. And it's at a record high or nearly record high.
Yes, and many of these same extraordinarily wealthy people who are making out like bandits, and some of them at the top are robber barons. They're just like what we saw in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, like Elon Musk. They are now organizing for Trump. They are putting huge amounts of money for Trump. They're getting behind Trump. Even Jamie Dimon, who used to be sort of Wall Street's favorite Democrat and head of one of the largest banks in America,
J.P. Morgan Chase.
J.P. Morgan Chase. Jamie Dimon is now saying, well, Trump did a pretty good job. He did a pretty good job. Jamie Dimon, Jamie, you know that is not true, all right? You and I have talked. You know that that's bullshit. I don't know why you're doing that. Why are you saying that?
Okay, well, we have some tools that are at our disposal.
The election is the biggest
That's a
thing.
big tool.
And I wish these issues were more front and center in the election instead of
Well, we're trying.
personalities.
I know. Well, it's hard to
It's hard.
do that. But
It's hard.
we do have to get the truth out.
But Heather, thank you. Thank you
you.
once again for helping get the truth out. And thank all of you for your patience and for your attention and for your dedication and enthusiasm and your concern for the public interest and the common good and also an equitable and fair society. We'll see you next Saturday.